And we're live. Thank you for coming back for yet another episode. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. But without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. N.R. LaPoint, introduce himself. Can you tell us who you are to people who might not have heard of you?
All right. I am an independent author. I have 4 books currently published. That's not including one anthology and a couple anthologies that are coming out later this year. I live in Wisconsin, Wisconsin native. I have lived here all my life. Let's see.
Is this where we're supposed to insert the obligatory cheese joke?
Yes, those are necessary.
Okay. I will Google one frantically, and we can talk about it off air so we don't destroy the last hope in humanity that my listeners might have. All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we found them. So this is yet another one of the slew of authors who we found through Declan, who we were in a pinch, and we said, hey, we had a bunch of cancellations. And he said, I got you, fam. And he sent us a bunch of authors to interview, and it's been a wide variety of content and creators, and I'm digging it. So this is yet another one that if you like it, hate it, blame Declan. So, all right. So now, sir, before we get started, because we are the Blasters and Blades podcast, we have to do it. But the religion question: Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Honestly, none of the above. There's things I like about all 3 of them, but I gear much more towards I guess pulp.
Okay. Any specific that's a favorite of yours?
Right now, a lot of the superversive authors. I actually just read A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and that was absolutely fantastic. Big fan of H.P. Lovecraft.
So did you watch the Princess of Mars, John Carter, that they attempted to make the movie? Did you like that?
I have not seen it yet. I've heard mixed things.
I think partly it failed because it was a marketing fail. They didn't tell you it was the Edgar Rice Burroughs. They didn't link it to the Mars. They just called it John Carter. And so if you didn't already know what that was, you totally missed it. And then because they poorly marketed it, of course, we didn't get the sequel, so they didn't get the kid to finish the story. But for what it was, I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard about the marketing problem as well. I think they were also the studio was also messing around with some other intellectual property, and so this shiny new thing, let's forget about Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is a huge mistake.
Yeah, I don't know why they decide to do what they do sometimes, but I mean it was good for what it was. I tend to be more forgiving of movie adaptations of books when I find them first, because I don't go into it with preconceived ideas. I can understand how if someone read the book first and then watches the movie, they're sometimes a lot more critical than I am, because it just sort of is the way it is.
Yeah.
But I also accept, generally speaking, that a movie adaptation of something is its own property, that just similar name and similar themes. And if you can accept that, you tend not to get all butthurt about the changes.
Yeah.
So, and some of the changes, at least in the past, were technology to recreate what was in the books just wasn't there to do it on screen.
Yeah.
Although I don't know with CGI that's an excuse anymore.
No, it actually seems like there's been a downgrade in quality of CGI in the last couple of years for some reason.
I don't watch enough new movies. I was in college from 2000 2004, and then I was in the twice to Iraq, and then the recovery. So like I just had a stretch from the first decade of the 2000 of the 21st century. I just didn't watch anything. So I've been going back and catching up all I missed before I catch all the new stuff. So I haven't seen any of the new CGI. I do know when CGI came around, there's almost like there was a decrease in acting ability, because everyone started relying on the explosion and the green screen, that they forgot like the dramatic acting.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
There's a reason Hollywood has started reaching out to some of the Shakespearean trained, like classically trained actors from overseas lately, is because, that you have to have the charisma yourself as the actor to pull it off. So, but
Right.
We have one more religion question, because we here at the Blasters and Blades podcast are polytheistic. So Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or The Wheel of Time?
Lord of the Rings, easily.
It is the granddaddy of them all, so I get that. We might have to take him out of rotation just to be fair to everybody else, but I can't think of another equally iconic property other than the three we named.
Yeah, I think I
So,
read. Oh, sorry.
as I say, so dear listener, when you hear this and you leave in the comments, if there are any we should sub in that you want to hear the guest wax poetic about what's their favorite, throw them in the comments and we'll rotate some in. So you were saying?
Yeah, I actually read the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. I think back in fourth grade, so that's nearly 30 years ago. And I recently read I found an illustrated copy of The Hobbit and read that to a couple of my boys, and they actually got pretty well into it. The pictures help, but they were pretty excited about some of the plot points, especially the goblin hole in the wall through which they're all dragged.
Yeah. Did you watch the weird cartoon that came out in the late 70s, early 80s of The Hobbit? I
Oh,
actually really like that one.
yeah, I remember really liking that one. Haven't showed them that one. I think the visuals might be a little too scary for them at that age, but eventually, yeah, that's gonna be one to see.
That one and The Last Unicorn I found right about the same time.
Ah, okay.
Is that another one you've seen or no?
I've seen it once, and I recall it being kind of bizarre. I don't remember it very well. But that didn't that have Christopher Lee doing a voice as well?
I'm pretty sure, but it was also filmed in a time where nose candy was not as hard to get. And we'll just leave the creative arts to do their thing. So there's some of that trippy acid thing going on. I don't know if they were actually doing drugs, but they sort of sometimes felt like there might have been some stuff going on in that writer's room. But
A little
not
bit.
quite to Fantasia level, but I mean it was a little trippy. So all right, so we like both the fantastical and the scientific, but what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
That's a tough one because I was hit with the Lord of the Rings pretty early on, and I grew up with my dad was a big Star Trek: The Next Generation fan, and he had a bunch taped off of the TV. So I grew up, watching the Rankin Bassett Hobbit, and also the Star Trek: Next Generation. So they kind of hit me at about the same time. Uh, I think the fantasy held me more, just because it's a bit more uh, out there. It gripped my imagination a bit harder than science fiction.
Okay. Okay. That's a good answer. There's no wrong answer on these ones. That makes it really easy to give good answers though. So what was your first memory of engaging in speculative fiction as a genre? Was it watching those shows with your dad, playing games on the computer, board games, role playing? Like, where did you discover the genre?
Yeah, I think it was probably the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit. My older brother had the old like 4-book box set with the really kind of ugly covers. And I just like picked them up and read them and just loved them ever since. And it kind of spiraled into a eventual love of like tabletop gaming and that sort of thing. I remember
Okay.
I actually still have most of an old copy of uh was it Warhammer Quest, which I don't think is in print anymore. Um, and that's a pretty fun game.
Okay. So what is it about the larger field of umbrella of speculative fiction that you love?
I think it's the adventure of it really. You can I When it comes to writing, you can pick characters from like archetypes or what have you, base it off of somebody but throw them into some crazy situation where they have to fend for themselves against whatever insane creature that pops into your head, um, and throwing magic or spaceships and any number of things, and it's enormously fun, and there's just a lot of potential to do just about anything you want with it.
Okay. That is a good answer. The endless possibilities are what most people come back to of why they love it. They're not constrained by humdrum reality. They can sort of experiment in that field. So, how did your love of speculative fiction as a genre transition into you writing stories in this space?
Well, I saw a lot of the potential, and I was reading just a lot of like mainstream fiction, in particular young adult stuff, and just it wasn't very good, and it had some questionable moral content. So I just kind of got sick of it. So I wrote my first novel, Light Singer, with the specific intent of being young adult uh, portal fantasy, to just to write the kind of story that I wanted to see. Um, so that's what got me writing, is just noting a lot of the mainstream stuff just not up to par with what it could be.
Did having kids yourself and wanting them to read sort of stories that teach them right and wrong, was that an influence on why you were telling YA specifically?
I think so. Yeah, it's because there's a lot of stuff where I'd be reading through. It's, oh, I really wouldn't want my kids reading this. Like, why is this sort of thing so prevalent? So yeah, I started writing, and eventually it spiraled into bumping into a lot of writers within the pulp rev and superversive circles, and a lot of them are doing a lot of the same stuff.
Okay. So many authors will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that you feel like shaped you as a storyteller?
Um, not so much actually. The stuff I write tends to be much more off the wall, not particularly pertaining to uh, my own personal experiences. Some characters I'll base off of some quirks of people I've known, and that tends to be a little more direct. That's pretty fun to do. Um,
Okay. So transitioning away from the writing side, let's talk about things from a fan angle. Have you gotten any cool fan art or had anyone cosplay your characters yet?
Unfortunately, I've not. I'd actually kind of love to see that sort of thing happen. So yeah, if anybody ends up doing that, they can find me on Twitter and Facebook. Would be the easiest way to get my attention with that sort of thing.
Or you could join up for his newsletter. He's got that linked on his website. That's always a good way to stay in touch with authors because, generally speaking, newsletters are censor proof. So, you're not stuck by what's popular of the day in any crashing systems. So, it helps the authors not put all their eggs in one basket, which is a good thing in an ever changing and fluid marketplace. So, and that's actually pretty apolitical because people on all sides of the political spectrum get banned all the time for various and sundry nonsense reasons. And this sort of allows the author to weather the storms, so to speak. So has anybody, since you started writing, asked you for your autograph?
Yes, actually. Mostly people I know already, but still, I, when it started actually happening, it was still kind of surreal, I guess. Just I had one, had some people, like, all of a sudden this some friend's daughter comes up running to me with holding a pink pen and one of my books. And asked for my autograph. That's yeah.
Okay. That is a interesting experience the first time it happened. So, like, what was that like for you? Were you in shock or?
Yeah, it was. I wasn't sure what to make of it, as because I wasn't expecting it, honestly. And so I've gotten used to it because I've been writing for a couple of years now. But yeah, the first time it seemed kind of alien.
Okay. So, all right, this is the point where we talk about everything you have written, Mr. N.R. LaPoint. So can you give can you give listeners the Reader's Digest version of your body of work?
All right. My first novel is Light Singer. It's a young adult portal fantasy about a group of teenagers that get sent to another world and try to find their way back home. Um, I have two books in the Raven Mist Creek series. The first one of that is called Chalk. The sequel is Dusklight. That's about a Catholic schoolgirl who discovers that she can, when she draws things with chalk, they become real working, like, constructs. This ranges from anything from like, firearms to a chalk golem, which she names August. And then there is the latest novel, which is Gun Magus, which is a take on the isekai genre, which involves a redheaded Texan who gets sent to a Final Fantasy-like world after engaging with a bunch of human trafficking gangsters in a gunfight and car chase.
That is an interesting take on it for sure. So for the chalk, the Lightbringer, I think was the one that was the Portal Fantasy. No, chalk, the chalk one. Was that the one about the chalk one? Was that one? That sounds really interesting. Is that one on audiobook?
Unfortunately, no. I was working with somebody who was trying to dabble into doing an audiobook of it, but that seems to have fallen through.
All right, we will definitely have to have you back to talk about that one because I am intrigued. I've never that's a unique take on it, so we will have to pencil that in. But obviously, those all sound fascinating. But we're going to talk about Magus or Magus.
Magus.
We're going to talk about that one today. So, how did you come up with the idea for this story? Like, where did you come up with the idea?
This was kind of brewing for a while. It came about from conversations with some author friends, and just an ongoing criticism that some of my author friends and other people were having with the isekai genre in general. And then Yakov Merkin wrote his Light into Another World series that he's finishing up. I read the first volume of that and loved it. And he took on a lot of the issues with the isekai genre and kind of flipped them around. And so I just started throwing out ideas like on my own, like how would I approach this, and so it almost started as a joke, and I ended up writing a story that I actually really liked. So that and I kind of lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so it came about with discussions over the genre and let's see, and also the notion that there was apparently a lot of stories involving heroes that were reluctant heroes. So I took a hammer to that, and my hero in this story, Kenneth Jericho, jumps right in, trying to be the good guy without any sort of hesitation or thought for his own personal safety.
Diving in headfirst is often not a good answer to problems. Or it's a good source though of problems, I will say, if you want to do it that way. All right, so before we dig into the story itself, let's look at this cover for a moment. So can you tell us the story of this this image that you used for your book cover?
Yes, that is what I was going for. I actually designed the cover. What I was going for was sort of a 80s action movie poster.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have the hero, the love interest, and the other main character, which is an anthropomorphic rabbit that can throw fireballs.
I noticed the rabbit. I was going to ask about that one, but I did get a fireball throwing. I guess he doesn't get eaten. He eats everyone else at that point. So, all right. Well, before we dig into the story itself, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
20 years have passed since the Ixa almost wiped humanity from the face of the galaxy. Now they have returned with a prophecy of doom, and the prophecy is already coming true. Start the series readers are calling an action-packed military thrill ride. Download Super Carrier today. Book 1 in the Ixan Prophecies trilogy. Available from Amazon and Audible.
It's an excellent series. Thank you, Scott, for sponsoring this episode. I highly endorse that series. I've read it a couple times myself. You can't find a better author than Scott Bartlett and his dynamic duo with Mark Boyette, his narrator. But all right, so we're here to talk about your book, though. So, what would your 30-second elevator pitch for this novel be?
Oh, okay. Let's see. A redheaded Texan gets isekai to a fantasy world in which he discovers that his firearm seems to have unlimited ammo.
Can I borrow that gun for reasons? I mean, for target practicing and stuff.
Right.
Do you go into how he discovers that, or is that obviously, we don't want spoilers, but do you go into that story, like how that happens?
Oh yeah, it happens pretty quickly. I think even right by chapter 2, he's figuring that sort of thing out. Yeah, it's basically a result of him being isekai'd. The magical powers he gains involve firearms.
Okay, so he has to go somewhere else to have those magical powers. All right, well,
Right.
that's a limitation. So what is it you think makes this novel special in the crowded field of isekai novels?
Well, as I started touching upon the hero isn't reluctant in any way, shape, or form. I actually tried to throw him back to based him sort of around like the '80s action hero archetype. So he does actually spout off a few one-liners here and there throughout the length of the novel as well. Let's see. As far as well, he doesn't get hit by a truck to transport him. That's apparently a something that sets apart. Let's see. Yeah, I also didn't make him ridiculously overpowered as a lot of isekai tends to do. Like his powers are ridiculous and fun, but there isn't he isn't in like god mode throughout the whole thing, just kind of crushing everything. Uh, like uh, like the one example I can think of off the top of my head was that time I was reincarnated as a slime, where the character ends up being basically unstoppable because of the nature of their power. So that's which I think can detract from like the character being very interesting if they're just stopping everything that crosses their path with a wave of their hand.
That makes sense. So you don't want to be so OP that the story is boring. I get that. So, you can include both isekai genre or just the written words in general, but which tropes do you feel like Gunmei just hits the best?
Well, the one that I delved into that I thought was a lot of fun was I took the harem anime tropes and like flipped them on their head. So he's surrounded by a bunch of beautiful women, but the love interest from the get-go is very, very clear. So there isn't actually any of that interplay that's typical in the harem animes.
Okay, that's part of the whole family friendly part.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay. So what genre besides isekai would you feel like this story fits the best into?
The 80s action blockbuster type of thing. Because there's an awful lot of like firefights and crazy off the wall action as well.
Okay. So this is the part, dear listener, where we talk about the novel itself. So get your pens ready. There will be a test at the end, but can you tell us a little bit more about your main characters?
Well, the main character, Kenneth Jericho, is we talked about a little bit how he jumps right into the action. The nature of which is like the book starts out right out with him engaging some human trafficking gangsters in an effort to save a little girl that he saw them dragging. They just grabbed and dragged him into their van. So he chases them to stop them without really even thinking of the consequences for himself. And he some readers have described him as not so bright. I think it'd be more accurate to call him foolhardy, because he's. I didn't write him to be stupid so much as just kind of selfless, I guess, in a way that might come off as kind of lacking forethought. Then there's the love interest, Zephyr, is a kind of based around the magical girl tropes, in that she has some magical abilities with the use of ice. And she is the apprentice to the anthropomorphic rabbit Rolfwin, who is referred to several times as a grand magus, who predominantly uses fire magic. And
So,
sorry.
so it sounds less like he's not smart and more like he's just naive and foolhardy, as
Yeah,
opposed as far as like the main character.
yeah.
Okay. All right. And so do we get to know more about the rabbit, the expert magus?
Yes, he is more of the like wizened old sage type. In my head canon, he is voiced by Christopher Lee, um, and he uh, is kind of the brains behind the forces of good in the story, really. So there's kind of a Big Trouble in Little China-esque thing going on with Ken essentially being Rolfwin's sidekick to some extent.
Okay. So do you play with that? I mean, because in the world he came from, the rabbit would have been dinner, and now he's like kicking butt and taking names. So do you play on that unique dynamic that would almost be a inversion of power dynamics as it would be in modern reality?
Not a lot. There's probably some elements of like the buddy cop genre, I think, to some extent, more than interplaying with the that sort of inverted dynamic.
Okay. So what about any secondary characters? Are there any that were especially memorable to you?
Yes. One of the other young women that joins their troop, named Pak, is a spider girl, who periodically has more eyes and legs, but she can sort of secret those away. Uh, sorry, magically. She was a lot of fun to write because she kind of serves as a foil to Zephyr. She has a very obvious crush on Ken, but also actually likes Zephyr, so she doesn't actually push it as hard as some other stories might, because she actually sees, oh, this is my friend. I don't want to actually, you know, hurt either of them, as that would be ridiculous. Uh, so it's ends up more of a funny comical tease than an actual antagonistic relationship.
Okay. That could still be interesting. So what about the bad guy for this story? Obviously, we don't want spoilers, but what can you tell us about the antagonist?
Yes, the antagonist is starts out as what you think to be just sort of a mid-level gangster who sends out his thugs to extort money and kind of bully people around. Um, and you find out that Rolfwin and Zephyr have actually been uh, trying to disrupt some of his plans here and there, but they can never get a handle on him because he's never present. It's always him throwing his thugs at various things. So Ken comes by, and they sort of recruit him without much effort. Um, uh, I'm trying to think of how to proceed without giving away too many spoilers as to what the villain becomes, but it does spiral into something much more grand and threatening for the structure of the world itself.
Okay. That is a good answer without giving any spoilers. So speaking of characters, if yours met you in a back alley and they knew the hell you put them through as the creator of this world, as the god of the world of Gun Magus, I'll get it right eventually, I promise. How would you see that interaction playing out?
Given the nature of Ken, he would probably give me a rather hearty handshake.
So
And I don't mean that. I don't mean that ironically.
So does that mean he's pleased to leave the world he was in? Because most of the time, like, that gets weird if you left a family behind, right? Like in obligations.
Yeah, well, at the beginning of the story, you find out he was fired from his job for unknown reasons, and he doesn't have any connections to the world. There's actually a conversation, I think, somewhere in the midpoint of the novel, where they discuss, like, well, we can try to figure out how to get you back, and he basically protests the notion to some extent.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So, since we did talk about characters, and you mentioned that you had some archetypes that you like, do you have a favorite character archetype?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the bubbly, upbeat female archetype. That's typically the most fun to write. I use that with Zephyr to an extent. I used it a bit more in Chalk with a kitsune character who I've described as sort of a murderous version of Pinkie Pie. But it's yeah, the dialogue tends to write itself for characters like that, and their interplay tends to just come like rolling. It's actually pretty fun to watch as I create it.
So, do you create like, do you outline it and then write it, or are you writing into the dark and sort of are surprised as the reader when you get there?
I have I know where I start, and I pretty much know like where I'm going to end. So I have probably about 10 to 20% of the book planned in my head. The rest is a matter of, I have these characters. I'm going to throw them into the beginning, have them figure things out for themselves, and just kind of fly by. I pants it, and I find the characters tend to write themselves a lot better. If I outline too harshly, I end up doing a lot more rewriting because everything ends up feeling very like shoehorned in and forced. It doesn't flow as organically if I just let the characters react to things on their own.
Okay. So finally, what can you tell us about the universe? In most stories, or at least the good ones, the universe where the stories happen is as much a character as the protagonist or the antagonist. So what can we expect from the world that your main character gets ported into?
It was very much influenced by Final Fantasy VI, and also to an extent the anime Chika, the Coffin Princess. So there's a lot of like there's some Magitech, there's some like floating fortresses, there's a ghost train, there's any number of uh, different fantasy races. Like they're another one of the characters that joins them is an elf girl. Um, uh, there's also some Lovecraftian horrors thrown in there as well. My editor actually, one of his notes towards the end, when a particularly disgusting creature pops up, noted very John Carpenter-esque, which I appreciated.
That is a good comparison to get.
Yeah.
That's a very good one. Especially since we were just talking about at the beginning, that was one of your favorites. So that that had to be especially touching for you, since you mentioned what you were reading from that era. So, is Gun Magus Magus going to be a part of a series, or is it the story done?
I had so much fun writing it, and the feedback has been so positive that I already have some ideas for what I want to do with a sequel. It is a standalone, but I love to bring the characters back and see what other kind of terrors and ridiculous situations I can put them in, whether it's sending him all back to Earth for some reason, because I mean Ken was dealing with the human traffickers, and that for all we know they're still around, or any number of other things that could be explored in the fantasy world itself too.
Having him go back with his magical cohort of friends could be an interesting story.
Yes, that could be a lot of fun with any quote unquote normal human interactions as they encounter an anthropomorphic rabbit that can throw fireballs.
That would be, you could almost do it where, like, and obviously we're just spitballing here and having fun, but you could almost have it where they think the rabbit's the pet until the rabbit starts talking to them. And then if they try to tell anyone, everyone's gonna be like, dude, you're crazy. that could be fun. That's almost like inverting the whole premise of the isekai novel is the fantasy world comes to you. I can see it. So we all know that every literary universe has its own internally consistent rules of science, technology, and magic, I guess. So what sort of magic can we expect from these books?
Gun Magus, I kept the magic system, to use the term loosely, pretty simple. It's like there's some very set abilities, usually referred to as Magus, and what that would encompass is things associated with that, and they have their limitations, usually along the lines of like, oh, you use an awful lot of magic, now you've depleted your magical reserves, as it were. Like for Ken, like his ammo seems fairly unlimited, but there are moments where he does actually run out of magical power, and he's left to his own his own devices and just his two fists.
Okay. Do you do any of that in the novel, or
what's that?
Do you do any of that in the novel where he has to go fist to fist?
Oh yeah. There's a couple moments I think that there's a fist fight with a troll at one point, wherein he gets his gun knocked out of his hand at least once or twice.
So do you have him coming in with any martial skills other than the experience with guns?
It's mostly his I mean, well, he's the type that takes care of himself, so he's not he's not a lazy human being, and he does note that he would go to the range for like practicing and training like as often as his budget and free time would permit, is how I think I put it in the novel.
Okay, but what about the hand-to-hand stuff? Was that something he just sort of learns on the fly?
Yeah, so he's not particularly effective at that.
Okay, so of all the magic that you gave people in this alternative fantasy world, which one would you want for your daily use?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't see there being much practical use for the gun magus abilities, as neat as it would be.
Have you seen ammo prices lately? I mean, I'm just saying.
That's actually a very good point. There's also the fact that part of his ability is able to change other objects into firearms, which aren't normally firearms. But then there's the ability to use the fire in various ways. So I'd probably have to go with the gun abilities just because they'd be cooler and more unique.
All right, so how would you abuse that ability if you had it on Earth?
Abuse it?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Oh yeah, well, this is true. Legal concerns. We're just gonna insert a bleep and we'll move on. All right.
It seems like it would be a very easy one to abuse.
Yeah, I'm just thinking with the fireball one of all the times, like when you're grilling and things just aren't getting the heat you want on your grill. Hey, I'm still learning, people.
Right, right,
That would be convenient to come in and just sort of supercharge that fire just enough to get the perfect cook on your grill. That's
right.
such a dad answer, but it is what it is.
Well, everything tastes better cooked over fire.
It does. It does. So your universe clearly has fantastical creatures in it. So how do you go about creating them? Do you let your nightmares inspire you? Are you inspired by Mother Nature? Do you make things up out of whole cloth? Like, where do you get these creatures from?
Oh goodness, it varies. It's usually just I let my imagination run wild. Usually there's a lot of uh, Lovecraftian and John Carpenter influence. Things with far too many teeth, far too many eyes, tentacles where there shouldn't be tentacles, um, eyeballs where there shouldn't be eyeballs. Just anything off the wall. If I think of it, I tend to add it somewhere or make a note of it to use later. Um,
Okay,
yeah,
that's
it gets pretty crazy.
I mean, it all makes it fun. Some people are, like they like to pull from folklore or whatever. Pulling from all over is an acceptable answer. So this interview is obviously winding down, but before we go, was there anything about Gun Magus Magus that I didn't ask that you wanted to tell us before we move on?
Um, Not that I can think of at the moment.
Any plans for this to come to audio for those that are listeners?
I've been starting to mull over the possibility. I haven't delved too much into it, so I'm not sure what the options are for how to get it out there. I think Amazon has some sort of uh, service that they do that to get it through Audible. So I've looked into that a little bit. Yeah,
So
because
they have
I've
ACX, I think, is what you're thinking about.
okay, because I have actually had people request me to get audiobooks out there. It's just a matter of getting somebody to do it.
Okay. So, because we mentioned that you started writing because you wanted things that told good moral stories and you wanted things your kids could read, what would the age range be for this stories where you would feel comfortable saying, yes, if you're this old, you could read this novel?
Depending on the kids, I'd say mid to late teens. I mean, there isn't. I don't think there's any profanity. Uh, there's no sex. There's the worst thing on that end is some of the women wear some interesting outfits, but I don't dwell on it. The violence is pretty off the wall, but I don't dwell on describing gore. Uh, I mean, this wasn't a horror novel. There's some horror elements, so I'd say it's pretty PG-13.
Okay. All right. So before we let you go, dear listener, we would like to remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. They help the right readers find the right books. And as I tell you all the time, the reading writing process is a symbiosis between the readers and the writers. And your part to help is to write the reviews so you can help other readers dig the same kinds of things you dig so you can get sequels to them. Because if the author can't feed his family, he generally has to get a day job. So do your part, write the reviews. It helps, and we all greatly appreciate it, and we benefit from it with more awesome novels. And just as like I said, as a reminder. But before we let you go, Mr. N.R. LaPoint, can you tell listeners how they can find you?
They can find me on Twitter. Is probably the easiest place to find me, and I'm more active on there than other places. I do have a Facebook author page as well, and a blog at empyreanblade.wordpress.com, which I haven't actually updated in a little bit. But that's mostly book reviews. Yeah, Twitter is probably going to be the best place to find me.
Okay, and as usual, dear listener, all the links are in the show notes. So if you can't remember how to spell it, don't worry about it. Click the link, you're good to go. We got you. But you can find us on our Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. Be sure to comment in there if you got more questions for the author. I can generally make sure they get them and answer them even if they're not on Facebook. So it is a good place if you want to talk to the authors we interview. We can make things happen for you, dear listener. You can follow us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters and blades. If you're listening to this at the end of September, Doc has hopefully recovered from her trip to Dragon Con, where she is as we record this episode. So hopefully soon we'll have a proper website. But in the meantime, we do have the anchor.fm, which hosts our episodes for free. You can go there and support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. It does help us keep the lights on. Or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes from too much caffeinated goodness. They will drink the sacred bean water, people. But as we bring this to a close, I wanted to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the aforementioned Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for stopping by, Anar.
Thanks for having me.